What's going on, folks? This is Mike from Techaholica, and today I'm bringing you my second lesson in my Twitch bot tutorial. This is what we're going to talk about today. Also, if you haven't done so, go check out the first video. And also, I did a setup video kind of showing you how to get your environment set up. So if you need to, check out that video too. But today I want to talk about aliases, reading and writing from online files, and string concatenation. So let's get into it. All right, so let's look at what we have since last time. So this is what we did last time. And what I added today was this section here, right? So this set variables and set variables here. Before I talk too much about this, I want to kind of explain what we're going to be doing. So I like to have configuration files that are kind of external to the script, and I'll show you how that looks right here. So this is the config file that we're going to use for this script. And the reason I like to have this set up is because I want to be able to change the behavior of the script from outside the script, right? So if I want to change the game title or how long the timers take and all that, I don't want to go into my script and change that, because once I get the script running, I don't want to have to modify it too much, right? Because it's running, it works. I just want to change little things outside of it. So that's why I set up this external file. It's a text file, but it's a special text file. It's a configuration file. And the way it works is you have here a section, which is between these two brackets. So this is how you designate a section. You can call it anything you want in here. I'm calling it config just for, make it easy. And then you have properties. So this is the property equals the value. So whenever I say game title, what I mean is Techaholica slot machine, right? So this is the game title and the welcome message that people get. Cash add amount is basically, later on I'm going to show you how to make timers. And what happens is when a user enters the chat room, they're going to have a timer kick off for that user, and every so often they're going to get a certain amount of money. That's like free money for being in the chat, right? And so user timer is the amount of time in seconds that you can reward them, and the reward amount is here, right? So cash add amount is 10, so every 600 seconds give them $10. So you can change this up however you want to. The other one here is user default bet. So this is like, when they first entered the chat and they start playing slots, if they didn't ever change their bet, the bet's going to be $10. All right, so that's just a small thing to set up as a default. And then here is the base stir. So if you saw my original video, setup video, you know that I mentioned this thing called app data, right? So app data, yeah. And I mentioned you might want to set up a shortcut to this, because you come to this a lot, right? So that's an environment variable app data, and it's going to take you to this directory here under the Roman directory. And what I'm saying by base stir is I'm saying, okay, whenever you're in MRC and you're talking about a file location, it always means from this directory where can you get to it, right? So what I'm saying is that I want to set up all my files to look in this slots directory here, in the slots folder. So I'll set up my base stir to be in the slots folder, so whenever I reference anything, I know exactly where to get it from, right? So it's going to say, okay, look in the Roman directory, look in the slots folder, and that's where you should find the file. So I'll make more sense later on, but let's move on from there. Okay, so now, if you remember last time we talked about this onload. What this means is that whenever the script loads for the first time, right? So if you go file load, you're going to do stuff in here. Now I could just copy and paste all this and put it in here, but I think it's a little bit cleaner just to say, what are we doing when we're loading? Well, we're going to set all these variables, right? So here's where we actually do all that work down here. And we talked about aliases a little bit before. So these are aliases, and basically what it means is when I type this, do this. When I type this, do this. They're basically shortcuts, right? But here what we're saying is when I type this, do all this, right? So this is a multi-line alias. And if you're used to programming already, this is basically a function or a method. This is how you do that kind of stuff. So here we go. Here's just a quick description of what we're working on. Oh, also this -L, it means local, right? So if you had another script running that was also called set variables, it knows to use this one from this script, the local one. So here we go. First thing we're going to do is we want to read the configuration file, or set where the configuration file is. And so we're saying, okay, the config file that we're going to read from is in this slots config. That's what we're doing. So it's down here, right? Under slots config. So this is the location. We're going to store it in this. So set is a way of creating global variables. And what that means is that even though I'm creating the variable config file in this alias, it's going to be available throughout my script, right? It's going to be global. Other times we've done variables, I guess we haven't done any yet, but usually you set a variable and it's local, right? So once you're in its alias, that variable exists, but once you leave the alias, the variable's gone. You can't use that variable anywhere else in the script. So you use the set command to make it global. And this -e, I think, just means it's like a cleanup thing. So whenever it exits, it's going to clean out all these variables so that they're not still in your variables directory. And when you set these, they're going to end up here in this variables tab, right? So you should see them when we run it. You should see the variables in here, which is also why I mentioned here that since there's only one variables tab right here, so script forest.ini, that if you run this bot in multiple chat rooms, it's going to fail, right? Because you're setting these variables in these separate chat rooms, but they're all writing to the same variable file here, right? So they're overriding each other here. So it's not really a problem for me because I only run my bot in one chat, but something you should be aware of if you want to run this bot in multiple channels. You need to find another way to save them. So, all right, so moving on. So here we go. We're going to set a global variable called config file and set it to this location here. And then now that we have that, we can say, okay, so now what I want to do is I want to say one called game title. And this is the command read ini. And what that does is says, okay, I need her, it's, like it says, it's reading an ini file. So the ini file it's going to read is the first argument, config file. -n is just use that every time. I think that's like a security thing. Config, this is the section, right? So if you go back to this, the section is called config. So I'm saying read from config file, read from the section, and then which property, the property is the last argument. And so here we're going to say the property you want to read is called game title. And so what that's going to do is it's going to say, okay, go to the config file, go to the config section, go to the game title property, and take this value here and put that into this variable here. And this will be the global variable that you can use everywhere, right? All right, same with everything else. I'm basically just recreating everything in that config file and putting them into variables that the script can pick up on. So I guess we'll give this a shot and see how it looks. So it's going to say load. We're going to load our slots ini script. It's going to say the script is initializing commands. Do you want to run this? You say yes, I want to run that, and then it runs. And so now you should see, oh, I didn't run pick up. Let's see if I missed. Oh, I didn't save it, my bad. So let me save it first. It won't take 2 seconds. Not that one. All right. So set variables. So I already have my script written out ahead of time just for reasons like this. All right. It's also kind of weird when people who just like write as you're describing stuff, because it's always like, I don't want to sit here and watch you type out forever, you know. So that's why I wrote mine ahead of time. I'm just going to cut and paste it here. All right, make sure I saved it this time. Load. All right, variables. All right, there you go, worked, right? So what it did is it ran and loaded, it ran the onload, and then it populated all these variables. So basically what it's saying is, okay, you have a config file variable, this is the value in there. You have the game title, this is the value in there, right? So it worked just how we expected it to work. Also, you can see this is why it would fail if you did it in several chat rooms, right? So if you had different variables here that you want to use for different chat rooms, they'd all be writing to the same location, which is why it would fail. So not a problem if you're just running into one spot or one channel. All right, so now let's move on. All right, so now we're going to do the second part of it, which is writing to an ini file. All right, so what we have over here, now this is not going to make too much sense. Let me just write it in and then we'll explain it. So here we go. Let's get rid of this. So we're no longer welcoming people to our channel. You can leave that in there if you want to, not a big deal. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, we have this little button here. This checks the brackets, and what it also does, so check, make sure all your brackets line up. You don't have too many or too few, but it also do the spacing right. So you can see it's spaced it over just right. So, you know, it's a nice little handy thing to use. Whenever you're writing, you want to use that all the time. You know, just write a section and then come over here and check brackets, just to make sure you're not having errors along the way, because there's nothing worse than like writing a whole long string of code and then it breaking, and you can't figure out where it broke because it broke way in the beginning, but you've been writing this whole time without testing it, right? So make sure you test your work as you go along. Okay, so here we go. Now this is a local variable, right? So it's a var user file. So this down here, set, is how you do global. So these variables are going to be available to everything in here. Var is a local variable, so this user file is only going to exist in here. Once this onJoin runs and it exits, this user file won't exist anymore, which is what we want. So we mentioned last time that onJoin means whenever any user joins your channel, do what's in here. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a user file. And the idea is that I want to have whenever a user joins, I want to set up a configuration file for that user and store values in their file, right? So that's what we're going to do. So kind of like we have the config file that has values for the script. Every user is going to have a text file associated with them that's going to have stuff like how much money they have and how many bets they place, and stuff like that, right? I guess you could add on as much as you want to, right? I think all we're going to worry about is just how much cash they have on hand. So but we need to have a way to store that, and we're going to store that in a text file for each user. So all right, so this part here is a little bit funky. What we're doing here is this is the string concatenation, and what that means is it's going to take this whole thing and put it into one string together, right? And it's also going to evaluate the variables inside. So this is a variable baster, which we wrote down here, right? So this is baster, which is, we know, means slots, right? So it's going to say, all right, take slots, add the /user/ put that together, then take Nick and run that. So whatever username just joined, put that in here. So say this might be Techaholica, right? Then you want to do a period.ini. So once this runs for, say, a Techaholica, if I just joined in channel, when it runs, it's going to have this variable inside the user file. It's going to have slots, users, Techaholica.ini, and that's going to be the file that we write to for that user. All right, so let's get rid of that. Okay, and here we're saying if not exist, then create the file, which is going to be another alias, right? So I'll show you how to do it in a second, but first let's look at this here. So this, whenever you see this exclamation, this means not. So it's going to say is, look at this, is this true or false? And then whatever it is, do the opposite of that. So if this is true, then this is going to make it false. If this is false, then it's going to make it true, right? This makes it a little bit easier to read like out loud, right? So we're saying if not exists user file, then create the file for them. And exist is the command which says, okay, give me a location of a file and I'll return true or false if that file exists. So if this says, okay, if the file does exist, it's going to be true. This is going to make it false by doing this, and since it's false, it's not going to run stuff in here. But if it's false, saying file does not exist, then this not will make it true, therefore it will run in here, right? It's a little bit confusing, but you'll get the hang of it. All right, so if it doesn't exist, then we're going to create that user file. And basically what we're going to do is, I don't think I'm going to populate the whole thing right now, so let me just cut and paste part of it. Actually, we could do the whole thing, right? So we're going to need to do the whole thing anyway because this is part of the write ini portion, right? So let's go down to here and we'll just copy this down here, right? So this is our alias, create user file. And I can see this one's a little bit different because it takes a parameter, right? So we're saying create user file and pass in the nickname of the user who called this thing, right? So here we go, create user file. We're going to once again set the variable. This is basically the same code as above, but instead of Nick, we're using a 1. I think this would work as well, but I kind of want to show off how to use this. We talked about this last time, but 1 means the first parameter. So here 1 would be this guy, right? So say create user file, pass in Nick. So we run this, 1 is set to Nick. So we're basically creating the same user file we did last time, setting 1 to Nick. So once again, this would be the same slots, users, Techaholica.ini in this file. And now here we go, write ini. What that's going to do is it's going to write to a configuration file, to the section, the property and the value for that property. So let's give this a shot and see if it works. It's going to be a little bit weird when you're kind of testing this stuff out, because IRC is, first let me just load this just while I'm talking. So actually let's save it first. I'm gonna mess up again. Load it. Okay. All right, so while it's there, I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's a little bit funky. That's because whenever the IRC is like a minute behind what actually is going on in the web interface. So if someone joins the channel, it's gonna be like a minute or two before they actually show up in your channel here on the IRC. So you can see I'm already on my side screen here. I already joined the channel, but you can see here that I'm not in there just yet. So it takes a second. It's kind of annoying when you're testing stuff out, that they're like, all right, I want to test things as you load or as you enter and leave a chat room, but there's always this big delay on how long it takes, right? So we'll just let it go for a second. Try my best to stall, and we're gonna come over here and look at this folder here. So once it starts, I think it might break because it's looking for a user's subdirectory here. And it might create the file for you or may not, we'll see. So, all right, so Tecahalka just joined, and it should do my script now. So let's see if it, make sure I didn't get any errors. All right, so no errors there, no errors here. All right, so let's see if it ran. Variables are slots, baster is slots. So it should have ran and created a subdirectory for us. And I wonder if it failed because it didn't have that slots directory already. So I was a little bit worried about that. I kind of want to test it out. Probably should have tested it out before making the video, but let's try that again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, it's looking for a users subdirectory. So we'll just call this users. Okay, so now there actually is a folder there for users, and what we're going to do is I'm going to leave the chat over here. So in a minute you should see me leave up here, and then once I leave, I'm going to come back in and see if that works this time. And of course it's going to take forever to do all that, so I guess just bear with me for a second. But everything else looks good, right? So we're saying, all right, onload, set these variables, configuration file, read from the config file here. Those are getting stored over here, so we have those. And then it's saying on join, do this, create a user file, tecahalka.ini, check and see if that file exists. If it doesn't exist already, create a file called, which we're passing along to this other alias. And if you're not familiar with programming, this is kind of how you, all right, he left. This is kind of how you layer your code, is you try to make it readable, right? So what we want to do is I want to be able to see on join. I want to see what am I doing when we join. I don't want to have to type in this entire thing. This is a small one, but for this one, right, you don't have to type in the entire thing into this section because it makes it hard to read. You kind of want to just be able to read it at a high level. So I want to be able to say, okay, when I join, I'm going to create a file if it doesn't exist. If not, don't do anything, right? And then I have a to-do section here for some other stuff. We'll just leave that blank for now. All right, so create user file. It's down here. It's going to say, okay, create user file. Make a new variable, populate it with the baster users one being Tecahalka in this case. We passed it in up here. It's right there, so we passed in this value to it, and then once we get that value, we're going to write to that file. We want to write to the character section, write to cache, and then give it the value 500. So we'll see if that did anything. All right, so it did work. So I'll open this with Notepad and let's look at it. All right, there you go. So it wrote to the character section, it wrote cache 500 to it. And the reason why we want to check for it first, as you can see, if it doesn't exist, it writes it, as long as you have that user directory. I guess I should have tested that out ahead of time. But you need to have the directory, and if the file doesn't exist, when you do a write ini, it will create the file for you. But we want to check and see if the file exists first, because this is only for new users. So as a new user, they're getting $500. But if they've been playing the game for a while and say they had $1,000, you don't want them to come back in and start all over again, right? So you want them to continue with what they left off with the last time. So that's how you do that, and that worked out just pretty good. All right, so I think that went pretty good. We got some high-level concepts in here. Hope you learned something. And I guess stay tuned for my next videos. I'll see you guys next time.